deeply disgusting.
You might have seen Senator Kennedy being witty and full of humor, but what happened here that made him so furious, he started using words like clown world on steroids and runaway screaming on the Senate floor.
I mean, it is clown world on steroids. I just wanted to run away screaming.
To understand why he unloaded a speech like this, we have to go inside one of the most shocking fraud allegations to come out of Minnesota in recent years, a case involving millions of taxpayer dollars, federal prosecutors, and accusations that grew bigger every year. And according to Kennedy, it didn't just grow, it exploded.
What I'm about to tell you, Mr. President, let me apologize in advance, is deeply disgusting. It's deeply disgusting. I mean, it is clown world on steroids. And when I first read about this, Mr. President, I read it a second time because I experienced slack-jawed astonishment. And when I read it a second time and I realized it was true, I just wanted to run away screaming.
This wasn't a moment of jokes or one-liners. Kennedy was angry, and he says he has a reason. He claims federal investigators uncovered a widespread welfare fraud scheme in Minnesota worth over $1 billion. A billion, not million.
Federal prosecutors have discovered that for the last 5 years, there has been massive welfare fraud in the great state of Minnesota. Massive. Over $1 billion of American taxpayer money has been stolen. Just stolen. They can call it fraud, but a better term would be stealing.
So what exactly pushed Kennedy to this boiling point? According to him, it started with a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future, created to feed children in Minnesota. A simple mission, feed the hungry. But as Kennedy describes it, what looked charitable on paper became something very different behind the scenes.
Feeding Our Future went to the welfare authorities in the state of Minnesota, which of course was administering federal taxpayer money, and they said, look, Feeding Our Children said, Feeding Our Future said, we want to feed hungry children in the Somali community. And the welfare people in state government in Minnesota gave them the money to do that. As I say, it started out very, very small, just a few $1 million. But eventually, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And more businesses in the Somali community signed up to be feeding sites. And Feeding Our Future, the Somali nonprofit, kept going back to the Social Services Department in Minnesota saying, we need more money, we need more money. And at the height of the fraud, they were spending about $100 million a year. Not over the lifetime of the program, $100 million a year.
But Kennedy claims there was one critical problem. The kids, the very children this money was meant to feed, weren't getting fed at all.
There's just one problem. There were no hungry children. There were hungry children. They just weren't getting any of the money. And the businesses, many of which were Somali-owned, which were getting some money to feed the children from Feeding Our Future, the nonprofit that was quarterbacking this whole thing, they weren't giving any of the money to hungry children. They were spending it. These businesses were spending it on yachts and vacations and jewelry and furniture for their home.
$100 million a year, Kennedy says, gone, stolen. And this, he claims, was only the first of 3 major schemes. But instead of stopping at child nutrition funds, Things escalated fast.
That was scheme number one. But it got worse.
If the Feeding Our Future case sounded bad, Kennedy says it was only the first layer, because after food programs came another proposal, one meant to help people without homes. Again, a mission no one should object to. But according to Kennedy, what happened next followed the same disturbing pattern.
Scheme was supposedly to help people who are homeless. Remember, I said in America, when you're homeless, we'll house you. Well, that's what they were trying to do in Minnesota. A nonprofit was set up, again run by someone of Somali ancestry, and this nonprofit went to a bunch of providers who supposedly were going to provide housing. And they told the welfare authorities in Minnesota that they needed millions of dollars to house people who were homeless. And once again, the program started out small. When they started it in 2020, these crooks started it in 2020, they said, we only need $2.6 million. But then in 2021, they said, we need $21 million. And in the following years, they said we need $42 million the next year, then $74 million to feed, or rather to house the homeless, then $104 million a year, not the total scheme, a year.
The numbers rose like a staircase, each year higher than the last. But according to Kennedy, this wasn't real housing. No apartments, no shelters, no beds, just paperwork and money moving somewhere else.
There's just one problem. None of the money was going for housing. None of the money was going to help people who were homeless. These providers and this nonprofit that was coordinating it just put the money in their pocket.
2 programs down, both meant to serve vulnerable groups, children, the homeless, and now, Kennedy says, comes the scheme that made him react the strongest, the one involving children with autism. Not only was money involved, but families were allegedly being recruited and paid to label children as something they weren't. And that is where Kennedy's speech turns from frustrated to disturbed.
But there's more. They came up with a third scheme. This one makes you want to throw up in a potted plant.
If children and homeless programs being exploited wasn't shocking enough, Kennedy says what came next was even harder to process. A program created to support autistic children, one of the most vulnerable groups imaginable. But according to Kennedy, when they couldn't find enough real cases, the solution wasn't to help more kids. It was something else entirely.
In this third program, a group of providers, supposedly medical providers, got together and they went to the welfare authorities in Minnesota and said, we need money to help autistic children. You say, well, that's a wonderful thing to do. And then these providers, once the welfare department at the state government in Minnesota gave them the okay, they went out and started recruiting autistic children. You say, well, okay, we have to get the word out somehow. But they couldn't find very many autistic children. So they started going to parents in the Somali community and saying, can we call your child autistic? Can we certify that your child is autistic? If you'll let us do that, we'll pay you a bribe. Anywhere from $400 to $1,500 a child. In the first year, they were clever. They only asked for $3 million. The second year, in 2019, they asked for $54 million. Then in 2020, they went up to $77 million. And then in 2021, they really got greedy. They went to $183 million. And in 22, $280 million. And in 2023, $400 million. All total, in these three fraud schemes, these crooks stole $1 billion of taxpayer money.
$1 billion, not across decades. According to Kennedy, just a few years. And that raises a question any viewer would have. If requests were skyrocketing and little evidence showed services were being delivered, why wasn't anyone stopping it?
Well, I started to say worst part, but let me amend it. Equally bad part. You say, well, hello, how could this happen? Why didn't the people in the Department of Social Services and the Welfare Department in state government, when they saw these claims arising, why didn't they say something? Didn't they go out and check these businesses that were supposedly sites to feed homeless children? Didn't they go talk to some of the children and their parents to see if some of the children really were autistic? Didn't the state authorities go out and say, can you show us one of the homes that you're providing to the homeless people? After all, we're spending $1 billion.
By this point in Kennedy's speech, the numbers are staggering. Millions turning into hundreds of millions, and eventually, $1 billion in alleged fraud. And naturally, the question becomes the one Kennedy asked out loud: how does something this large go unnoticed? For years, according to him, it didn't go unnoticed. State employees saw the red flags. They raised questions. They tried to push back. But Kennedy says they were stopped. Not by lack of evidence, but by fear.
They didn't. Because the politicians wouldn't let them. And the crooks who were setting all this up, they were pretty smart. I'll give you one example. Remember I talked about the nonprofit involved in feeding the so-called hungry children, called Feeding the Future? The rank and file employees in the welfare office started getting suspicious when the claims went up, and they contacted Feeding Our Future. And they said, hey, what's going on here? You know, we're going to start cutting off these claims because it's getting a little bit expensive. And you know what Feeding Our Future did? They threatened the employees. They said, if you cut off our money, they sent them an email, and they did it by phone. They told the state agency that failing to promptly approve new applicants from minority-owned businesses would result in a lawsuit, feeding accusations of racism that would be sprawled across the news.